What's up, people? Welcome to this episode of the By the Hood podcast or webcast because I don't know how you're consuming this content. I'm your host, as always. My name is Jimmy. And as we start off every episode, we just want to say thank you to everybody that supports us through our courses, our merch, sharing this podcast. We start every episode by saying thank you because we are very appreciative of the community that we've been able to build here at By the Hood. As always, I'm joined by my partner in crime, Corey. What's up, good brother? How are you?
What's going on, Jim? How's everything for you, man? Everything good?
Yeah, everything's good, man. I'm maintaining, man. A crazy world we're living in, but I'm maintaining. I got no complaints right now, man. As you all know, our platform is designed to talk to brothers and sisters who are doing amazing work in the community and business. And this brother right here, this guy is a mentor. He has built a tremendous organization that I want to talk about. Started off as a camp, but this guy right here is very successful. He's a teacher. First and foremost, I say he's a teacher because he's a teacher and a mentor, but he also has this organization we have to talk about, and he contributes a lot to the community and culture. And I'm looking forward to this episode to ask some questions because in looking at his organization, I just learned some stuff myself. But and he's also a longtime friend of ours, a classmate from years and years ago, brother John Carroll. John, how are you?
Pleasure. I'm good, Jim. Corey, it's good to be with you, brothers. It's like you say, long time since Central. We coming up on a milestone. So
Yeah,
be
yeah,
able to
absolutely, man.
connect with you dudes is an absolute pleasure. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. And like I said, your organization, the Roots of Knowledge Institute, right? So I knew you had this going on. I've been following what you got going on for a little while now, and I just happened to be going through your site, looking at certain things, and I found myself learning just from like I learned from your advertisements, right? Like I just learned like I didn't know the history of tennis. Like I know it's
Mm.
like a weird place to start, but like I just learned that from going through your site. So you're sharing this kind of knowledge with the young brothers and sisters that are coming up, and you're sowing into them in a way that's very important. And if you built this organization, so what made you create this Roots of Knowledge organization? How'd you get to start to want to do this?
Yeah, so like you said, first and foremost, I've been a teacher for the last, crazy 20 years or so, straight out of school, been teaching. And, I went to independent schools before Central.
Hmm.
Central, the big, preeminent public school in Philly. And then when I started teaching, I was back in independent schools. That was like, I had a connection there. And so one of the things you learn quickly is that, they'll have you and these days you can't have a school that's not doing some kind of diversity effort. But even in those efforts, it's limited. And so even like in a public school, the bandwidth of what a kid of color will learn about themselves is like minimal, so they'll cover, Martin, Malcolm, Rosa Parks for, Black History Month. That's it. Or you might read, if you got a real progressive school, you might read, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass or something like that. But there's so much more, to the history of the diaspora than that. So I just got to a point where it was like, listen, you got a lot of degrees, and you're only going to get so much out of these schools, fighting with these schools about curriculum. So I might as well just do it on my own. And, you look at other ethnic groups and that's what they do, so I'm out here in California now, and, there's large, Asian populations, and all of them have some kind of schooling that runs concurrent to what's happening during the school day. Or you look at the Jewish communities, they have Hebrew school that ultimately prepares students for that rites of passage moment, that is the bar and bat mitzvah. So I just felt like that's something that would be easily something that we could replicate in our community. And so I just got to work, and kind of capitalized on the people who I've met through the years, working in my school and others, to say, listen, let's do this. So that was the curricular piece of it, where I wanted to expose people, students, to more, African American authors, African American history. And then, I grew up swimming, and so I knew that in a sport like that, you don't see but so many Black folks in particular. So I wanted to make sure that I was exposing folks to that too, because the statistics on Black people drowning is just ridiculous. Like it's like 8 times worse than other communities. So I just wanted to try and put those two parts of my life together into something that would be, would be beneficial. And so that's how the Roots Knowledge Empowerment Institute began. There's a classroom component, and then there's always a sports component. So early on, we did tennis as the activity, and we did capoeira, which is the Brazilian martial art. And so that was something new and different for kids to experience. And then last year we had the opportunity, we did golf. And so that was cool for kids to
That's like
have a chance to go.
In terms of exposure, something they generally won't get exposed to. I just want to backtrack real quick. First of all, I should have introduced you as Dr. John Carroll. You are a doctor, right? And I want to make sure I acknowledge that, because a lot of times, it's funny, like in talking to our people that are PhDs and doctors, a lot of times they don't mind if you don't say that. And when you talk to people from other cultures, they say, "Oh no, excuse me, doctor." And you have earned that, so I want to address you as Dr.
Yeah,
John.
you definitely put that cape on, so you got to get that acknowledged.
I appreciate you.
I gotta give you that acknowledgement. That's the one thing.
What's funny is at school, I have a colleague, and she's the same way. Like, and it's that thing where being in school, you want people to understand what the credentials really are. So she makes a big point of that in school. And so in school, I am largely Dr. Carroll, but we family. It's all good.
No, I get that, but I want to make sure that at least our
audience got to know that you Dr.
This is Dr. John Carroll. Yeah, because
I appreciate you.
You put that work in. You put that work in. But another thing that I respect about you is that you're solutions based, right? So you see people who see the same thing that you saw, right? We don't have this in our community, and they just want to, go online and complain. You said, how about I create it, right? Do for self. And I think that should be acknowledged as well. You saw something missing, and instead of just complaining about it, you went and took action and created something. So that also has to be acknowledged, and that's admirable as well. And also the exposure that you're giving these children. The last episode of our podcast, Corey and I were talking to another professor, and he was talking about, we got into the conversation about exposure and how kids sometimes not having exposure, what it can do for their growth and their worldview. So that's also amazing too. Like, teaching a kid like a golf, like it sounds very simple, but I'm pretty sure that opened up eyes for a lot of kids. So that's the concept behind your institution. So let's take a step back though, right? Okay. So you're in California, but where were you born and raised? And speaking of your credentials, where did you go to school?
So yes, I'm Philly born and raised. My parents, both from Philly. We lived right over the bridge from Overbrook High. And my parents were both teachers. So education was paramount and at the front lines of everything in our household. And so they made the decision, put me in independent school early. I went to Germantown Friends for K-8, and then, went to Central. They wanted me to have that public school experience, and it was definitely a shock, just in terms of numbers, much less community. So at Germantown Friends, the graduating class would have been like 80 something. We graduated Central with like 500. So that was a great experience. And then I stayed in town. I went to the University of Pennsylvania for undergrad. And then as soon as that was done, started a master's at Drexel and, pursued education. Figured out that, I was originally supposed to be an MD. I was wanted a doctor in the house. My uncle was a doctor, so she wanted that for me. But organic chemistry, weeded the brother out pretty quickly. So I stopped fighting what was kind of becoming clear to me in my genes that I was a teacher. Like my parents have been teaching, I've been watching them teach forever. So I started a master's in education, finished that at Drexel. By then, right around the time I finished it, had gotten married. My wife, wanted to move to pursue entertainment. And so, being a teacher is like, no problem. We moved to California. After a couple more years of teaching, went back to school, UCLA for my PhD in urban education. So.
Okay, nice. And shout out to Drexel too. That's where I got my master's in real estate from. So
shout out to Drexel, sleeping giant in U City, man. I was last home in April, and what Drexel has done to their footprint, in University City is actually kind of impressive.
It is. They're definitely growing out there. So you're out in California now, and and your wife contributes to the culture too, because she's the showrunner on All American. For those that don't know, everybody watches that show. Like, I love her show. and you know, I love all her shows because she had a couple shows. Like she had the show with what's his face? What's the brother's name? I can't think his name off the top of my
She had
head.
Roswell Morris Chestnut. So
That's one.
yes,
Morris Chestnut
Yeah.
show. She had that show, then All American, which is like a very popular show. So, you know, which is amazing, right? Because this tying it into what you do, that exposure. I just love seeing this many black faces on TV. You know, as someone who watches TV, like just seeing black faces, like
The family contribution to the culture.
well, yeah.
yeah.
Telling our stories is important too, and so she's telling our stories, and you're telling our history, telling our old story. Like, so this is amazing. Your whole family is really contributing to the culture. So
Mom and pops is teachers. He's a educator. You know, wife putting the black stories on the tube, and he put, you know, he bringing it to the folks currently. You know what I mean? Like that's a whole movement. Y'all got a movement going on over there.
yeah. So and about that, right? So and I'm going to make sure that we share the website to your organization, the Roots of Knowledge, because one of the things I like is looking at the testimonies of the kids, like some of the things they learn, and I thought that was impressive. Like kids talking about, oh, I didn't know about the Harlem Renaissance. I learned that by coming through here, and I'm like, oh, that's dope. Like, oh, I didn't know about James Brown's music, tennis. Like I said, all these different aspects in the history of it. We have a rich history. And sometimes when our history is told, it's like slavery, civil rights, and Obama, and that's just our history, and we have a rich history. So, salute to you for telling that. So, when you got out to California, you saw these, you were teaching, you saw these issues, and you decided like, I'm going to create my own thing here. Um, Going through that journey, what do you think is your biggest obstacle, or something that you had to overcome, in terms of getting to where you are?
I just feel like I had to understand that, I could do it. I could be the leader of it. Like I didn't have to wait, for somebody's blessing on it. Like I had everything I needed to do to make this happen, and it didn't even take, like Corey said, putting the cape on. Like it could have been done before that. Like, but I do think, you put that cape on, you put them letters behind your name, that gives it that even more instant credibility, right? So, like you say, when people hear Dr. Carroll, it's like, oh, okay, this brother, he's been in school a little bit, so he knows a little bit about, or ideally knows a little bit about what he's talking about. So once I understood that, like, I was capable of doing it, I could build it, I'd been around long enough, it was full steam ahead. But it took me a while to believe like I could make something, that folks would gravitate to and believe in. But the response has been great, and so we've just tried to make sure that we've scaled it up in a way that was manageable, so that we continue to give a quality, experience to the kids. So, yeah,
All
that
right.
belief was big.
Right, stopping right there. How has the coronavirus affected how you've been able to, get with your roots of knowledge peeps?
Yeah, so much like everything else, man, it's just the idea of seeing people face to face. So this would have been our 5th year. So we were planning to, usually we do something local. Um, we would be in the city somewhere, like, we try to be where Black people are for sure. So we had kind of found a nice, area um, in the Lamert Park area, which is like a really historical Black enclave. So we were there and doing things. And so we were going to take kids, kind of in doing a way camp thing, just so we would have like more time with them and really be able to, build a whole day around programming. But that, with the coronavirus, that goes by the wayside. So, much like other people, we're going to shift and pivot, and we're going to do something virtual this year. We're going to do a book club. And so that has gotten a good response. The 2 books I selected were Ta-Nehisi Coates' first book, his memoir, The Beautiful Struggle, and then Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give. So we're going to do that for, 8th through high schoolers. And then, we've had folks like, I need something for that, for that 5 to 7th grade kids. So we're in the works of putting something together for that as well. So, we're just trying to make sure we do something, man, because again, the kids need it.
Yeah,
I think it's very important, no matter what kind of school you go to, I think to have knowledge of self and the belief that, you are more than what is often being portrayed of you in school, and we talked about even in the media, on platforms, it's important to know, so that you can walk in school with your chest out and not be believing what people are telling you at
yeah.
face value.
That's an amazing book too, The Beautiful Struggle. I enjoyed that book. But um, what I like about everything you're doing, it has like an Afrocentric worldview. And my question is that something that was instilled? You said your parents were teachers, but
Mhm.
is that something that was instilled in you from a young age?
No, I grew into that. They definitely were big on kind of African American history, right? So it wasn't nothing for us to be involved in any number of things. Go to museums, do similar things. But the tipping point for me was that my wife is Nigerian, so as I got to know her family in particular, and then be around them, and that a lot of times that Nigerian histories and African histories are passed down orally. So the more time I spent with them, the more I understood. I would be led to read different things and explore different things. And it really opened my eyes to the whole diaspora, right? Like I think like in America, oftentimes our kids get stuck again in our history starts at slavery and then you move forward. And so, that really opened my eyes to the history before that and to start to connect dots. And so, it was eye opening for me. I often marvel at like my wife's family, I call them, international moguls because of the way they've been schooled, like they'll go to school in Britain, come over here to America for college, and then they live wherever they want in the world and not, you know, think twice about it. And I think that's a thing that, kids in America, black kids in America could benefit from too. The idea that you're global citizens, it's not just, about being in America and that's the greatest experience of all. Like, there's experiences to be had all over the world. And, if you start thinking that way, you have an opportunity to enrich yourself, wherever you are.
Interesting. So along that journey, that you got there, what is something that you read or saw that kind of inspired you or gave you a certain level of knowledge? You don't mind sharing? I'm pretty sure it was a book or something that you read that opened up your eyes. What would you say that would be?
Yeah, the one I would that sticks to me, and we covered it, during the institute one year was Chinua Achebe, and I'm going to blank out on the title, but
Things
it's
fall
basically,
apart.
yeah, it's things fall apart is the one where he kind of talks about and chronicles the Nigerian independence struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
so reading that was big because then again, it gave me a better understanding into like we get into this thing about the social construct of race in America, right? So the idea of black, white, whatever. But, in Nigeria, it was this whole like tribal thing, different ethnic groups. And so you kind of understood the rise of, Igbos and their struggle with different tribal groups and kind of how their thought processes come to be and how they value education and move. And so you fast forward, and when you look at, college admissions, you understand why when it comes to, black student admissions, you often see a high percentage of African students, in that mix because, they've come to value education as a way to freedom. So that was a text where I was like, oh, okay, now I'm understanding, that what this mindset is. It really gave me a better understanding again of my family, and just kind of thought all throughout West Africa as those folks dealt with colonization. We
Okay.
deal with oppression here, but they have their own struggles too, and colonization is real even to this day. But they've been able to kind of move and make a way past that.
That's dope. I'm gonna make sure I add that to our reading list. So for our listeners or someone watching this video, we keep a comprehensive reading list when our guests come on and bring up specific books. So we like to keep that list going and keep it growing. Just if you look for something to read, things fall apart. Also, when that inspired a Roots album title, by the way, too, Core. I know you're familiar
Yeah,
with
did
that,
it
but
inspire the whole? Yeah, that's how I knew about the book. The Roots album brought me to the book.
okay. See, dope. See, it's power in hip hop on a positive side.
Absolutely,
On a
absolutely.
positive side, right? So I mean, I know that the coronavirus has made you shift gears in terms of now trying to do things in a digital space. But assuming we get back to normal, what does the future look like for the Root to Knowledge? What are you trying to do with this organization long term? How are you trying to build this out and scale this?
Yeah, and it's funny, this is where is I guess serendipity is the word that Corey reached out is because I think about you brothers all the time, and your shirt, Jimmy, by the hood. Um, that's where I'm going. To me, I feel like again, I built something. Already we're at we're a nonprofit. So once you get that, like you go. And I think there's a space to build it in the same way that other communities have their own schools. and go from there. I think it's important to have an entrepreneurial piece to whatever you're doing, especially if you're a Black person. I don't know if y'all have had him on already, but I heard him speak a couple weeks ago, and he just turned that light bulb on for me. The idea of entrepreneurialism and education. That's Sharif Al-Mekki, and
No, not
Yep.
yet. Not as yet.
but
We
he's
haven't had him on. I went to his school and I did a financial education presentation when he was teaching, when he was the principal at Mastery.
okay. So you see it. So y'all know. So I like what he's talking about there, and he has his thing where he's training Black teachers. So I just foresee growing the institution so that there's different arms to it, right? Where there's a publishing arm that does literature and creates some of the books that cover curriculum in the ways that I think need to be done for our students. There's childcare, there's after school programming, so that sports piece remains. There's just space to have a community center for all of this education,
Yeah.
teacher
What you're
training,
talking
parent
about is
education.
community building, right? And
Absolutely.
that's what we talk about, right? So
We on the same vibe.
yeah, so instead of sitting around complaining about things, you just go build, right? Because that's the solution. We believe in doing for self and go build.
And owning it too, right? Like that. So that's the biggest thing that I take from you guys, and I love what you're doing. Like I need to buy the book. I need to, I love what y'all do training the kids with the financial literacy. I think that's amazing, and I think about how to add that in the future, because I think that's critical.
Well, we online now, so you can get it from us.
Oh, boom! There you go.
Yeah. And the thing is, here's the other thing too, right? So, and Corey and I talk about this. So we talk about ownership in terms of understanding personal finance, the stock market, or what have you. Also buying the properties in your neighborhood, but what gets lost in a lot of times is it's not good enough just to own the residential property. You have to own the schools. You have to own the businesses.
Mm-hmm.
You have to control
education pieces.
Education piece is huge with that, because you have to control the overall culture and economy. If you just own all the homes, but you still go to the stores owned by other cultures, then
you don't own the neighborhood.
Exactly. You're not really buying the hood per se. You have to own it all. So it's all about community building, and the education piece is a big part of that. And again, this is not really groundbreaking. We've done this before. Like there's
been done.
Exactly. It's been done in multiple places where we've created these communities that were vibrant, that taught our history. So it's just a matter of bringing it back and now figuring out how to do that in these days and times. But what you've done thus far is very impressive, man. I'm very proud of you, man. As someone that, graduated school with you, I love to see, like I said, you and your wife, what you guys are doing are amazing, man.
Yo, he was in my advisory for 4 years. Ask him how many times he's seen me in advisory.
That's a whole other story, man. We could spend a whole episode talking about Corey and his rebellion public education, but
the seeds were planted though, right? So in addition to being an advisory, I was just thinking about this, getting ready for this interview, Corey. We was also in kind of what the advanced biology class early on.
Yep.
And that's one of those things that I think about now. It's like, oh wow, like our kids need to make sure that they're getting exposed not only to our history, but the top levels of curriculum that they can. So I work in a pretty prominent independent school out here, and one of the things that I fight in-house on is like, let's make sure the kids don't get pigeonholed into the lowest tracks of the curriculum because nobody believes that they can do it. Even in a school where you got folks who got money, who got paper, but it's still a thing where when it comes to skin color, they often get left, in the lowest tracks, So I remember coming to Central and, again, it was huge compared to Germantown Friends. And, I was like, okay, now I'm finally in school with, a whole bunch of Black people and all kinds of other people. And then, I talk about that biology class, and it was like me, Corey, and like 3 other people, that were Black. And it's like, and it was like, wait a minute, like I just finished seeing, United Nations, when I came in the building, and then, when I got to that class, it was very much still like Germantown Friends. So that was one of those was like, how is that happening? And I know it still happens today.
And that's interesting too, right? Because a lot of times it's about what you go back to exposure. It's what you're exposed to. And we tend to not they're not going to get this. They're too young. So that happened with us when we started talking about our summer camp, teaching kids finances, the stock market, real estate. A lot of people said, well, they're not ready for that, because we started accepting students at 5 years old.
Right.
And those were some of our sharpest students. They got it because all you do is put it to a level they can relate, and they understood economics, banking. I mean, and these are 5-year-olds.
Because it's always around them. They're being branded to. They understand this stuff. You just have to show them that they understand. It's not that they don't know this stuff. It's that they don't know it in the adult terminology. And
Yeah.
so
And if you
all
sow
we
those
did was
seeds
break it.
early,
Yeah, we just broke it down into the terminology that they can understand, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I know what that is.
yeah,
And
and then when you sow that seed early, when it comes time for them to take, the advanced math and start to look at, economics for real, then, it's
they
there.
ready to go.
They're
Yeah, they
ready to
ready to
go.
go.
And
They've
they
been
can,
exposed.
so like, again, when I start thinking about like, at our school, the earliest, places you can start to advance and go on different tracks is math. And so when you track backwards, you look at what these kids have been doing in a lot of these, different ethnic schools. I think of the Chinese schools in particular, like they're taking those early math classes and getting exposure from, like you say, 5, 6, 7 years old. So then when it's time to take algebra and pre-algebra and, 7th, 8th grade, they've been doing that, and have it down to a place where they can show, really deep understanding. So, that's the type of thing that I think is
Yeah,
important in our community.
our last guest talked about the branding of math. Like
Hmm.
he is a proponent of branding math as something that black children should get into and get involved in immediately. Like that,
Yeah.
his IG handle is all this math. Like he
Yeah.
is about that life. So to have two guests in a row talk about the branding of math and bringing it to the and exposure to it very early is eye opening, especially with the credentials that you two guys had.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, because it's like what happens is, and I don't know how much he talked about it, but like what I see in my school is that if you get ahead in math, then, and that's like I said, in our school, that's the earliest that you can start to accelerate. Everything else is on the same level. So all our kids take English, history, science the same at first. But if you start to get ahead in math, now when the honors and advanced science comes around, they're looking at your math grade, for the correlation. If you can handle this math, then you can handle this high level, chemistry, biology, whatever. So it really becomes a jump off point to get ahead in education because, there are departments correlations how you do a math versus how you do everything
That's
else. So
that's interesting. That's
yeah,
interesting.
it's
I never
important.
heard it broken down that way, but that makes perfect sense. I
He
always find it
behind the
interesting when
scenes though. He know exactly what he talking about.
yeah, I just always find it interesting when kids tell me I don't like math, I'm not good at math, but then they can break down percentages and analytics of different athletes. That's always amazing to me. I'm like, you're doing analytics here. What do you think you're doing? Like you can tell me their field goal percentage, all these different ratios and statistics that you're using, but you tell me you don't like math. I'm like, you do like math. You just don't know that you like math. You know, so it has to be told to them in a way, like you said earlier, Cora. Like you have to let them know that they know.
Yeah, they already know.
And
They already know what it is.
and you paint the picture for them, right? Because I was one of those dudes, and my mother was a math teacher, oddly enough, but it didn't come to me, as easy as it did to her. And I, in school was not someone who was going to be adventurous in math. But now you spin it forward as an adult, and like you say, you're trying to build institutions and figure out how things work. Like that requires great amounts of math. Like, okay, what do I need to do to make this budget work? Or what do I need to do, if I'm going to buy a building at some point, and spin it backwards? Like, what are the investments I need to make sure that happens, right? Like, how do you manage? Like, there's all these mathematical things that come into play down the road that, if you can plant that in a kid early, then it may get them more excited about what they're doing because they see the utility in it. Like, I didn't see the
Absolutely.
utility in doing proofs in geometry,
I didn't listen. I had Mr. Diano, one of the teachers. I used to hate this guy because he was real tough in geometry, and it's one of those things you say to yourself, when am I ever going to use this again, right? Then somehow end up in a career where real estate is my path. All I do is geometry and algebra now. Like in terms of calculating rates of return, net operating incomes, and then measuring buildings and looking at building plans. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm
Yeah,
the one thing I never
every
thought I'd
single
be.
day.
Yeah. So this is kind of what I do now is math, but everything is math though. So it's
everything.
interesting that you say that leads to. I never thought about how excelling in math early can lead you to a higher level of science though. That's
Yeah, we
interesting to
always
know,
talk
and I
about
think
reading, excelling in reading,
Hmm.
but math is the same. Math tracks the same way.
Whatever they always say, reading and arithmetic, right? Those two things, right? So, because reading is important, right? If you can't read, then
You
But
can't do the
anyway,
math if you can't read.
yeah. So that's what your future looks like is in terms of what you want to do now, and start to do a little bit more community building and things like that, right? So the question I was going to ask you out there is, obviously you have enough to support what you're doing. What kind of community is there out there for Africans and African Americans, like where you're at?
Yeah, the thing you find in California, like in contrast to Philly, is that everything's really spread out, right? So, like I said, I grew up in West Philly, but spent a lot of time, you know, Mount Airy, Germantown, you know, but that's only like a 20-minute ride, that's easy. Like in out here, like I live in, the Valley. You've heard people talk about the Valley. And so for me to get to what we would call a black enclave is like, 30, 40-minute ride. Like it's more spread out. Every area kind of has one, but to tap into them requires a lot more movement, right? So like we've had kids that come from Pasadena, and that's a ride though, and we had to figure out early on, like, where do we position ourselves to start so that we could draw kids. So there's enclaves of black people and, folks of the diaspora all throughout California. It's just a matter of, how much they're willing to drive,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can position yourself so that they will come to you. Cause it's a real thing out here. Like we have the 405, which is kind of the main thoroughfare that goes, through California. And there's the 101 that kind of cuts across and snakes its way up. And there's people who will not, come north of that 405 101 junction. I don't know how much y'all hear about that, but like the amount of driving people are willing to do, because traffic is real out here,
Yeah.
that's the thing. So
I've
we've
been out
kind
there
of,
before, and that was like the worst. I think Atlanta and Cali had the worst traffic. And
Yeah,
Cali, and the funny thing is, Cali was worse than Atlanta. Like I don't know whether it was the
I don't
405 or
know,
whatever.
but
I just
yeah.
remember being on a highway and everything was like in a complete stop, and people were getting out of their cars and having conversations with each other. And I'm like, this is what y'all do out here? Like, traffic is that bad out here? Like, what's going on? But
it's real, man. It's a car culture. We don't have that transit system that, take people the places they need to go. Like in Philly, you got trains that'll take you. You got two systems. You got the regional rail
mhm,
that'll take you all out to the suburbs, and we would definitely need something like that. And then you got the more local. You got say the orange and the blue line, which certainly was part of my childhood, but we don't got that out here. They're trying to build train systems,
mhm,
but it's not to the level that places like Philly or Chicago have, where you could not be in a
yeah.
car.
And that's
So,
interesting because you mentioned something about like, and I grew up in Germantown. So for me, I didn't recognize the power of, say, like a Germantown in Mount Airy until I got older and realized what was actually there. When you have like, a working class black neighborhood,
hmm
it's something different. Like, I didn't recognize that until I got older and said, wow, that's actually pretty special. What was there? Um,
Right.
yeah, no, yeah,
That's,
yeah, because
that, most black neighborhoods, people think poverty and destitute area, and you grew up in a working class black neighborhood.
yeah, exactly. Like, but
You know what I mean? Like,
but if that's your reality,
not
you don't
that.
recognize that there's something different about it. You know what I mean?
yeah, it's funny. Like I'm at that place now. And I don't know about y'all, but like you unfortunately have older folks in your family pass on and transition, and they leave stuff, right? And so one of the things that's clicked for me over the last, I'll say, probably 5-10 years per se, especially we start to get better financial footing, is that, man, when they pass on, you can't just let those houses go away. Like my
Yeah,
grandmother
we
on
talk
my
about that all the time.
grandmother on my dad's side, much like you, Jim, she had a house in Germantown. I'm blanking on the streets, but it wasn't far off, what's it? It wasn't far off Germantown Avenue.
Okay.
And it was one of those like multiple story,
Big
houses.
old Germantown houses. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think about it now and I'm like, damn, to have been able to keep that in the family would have been nice, especially when like you say, Germantown, Mount Airy, those neighborhoods ain't going to change much ever.
Yeah.
Um, so that would have been nice. My family originates out of North Carolina, so I've had a lot of my grandmother's sisters pass, and those houses just go. And so now, I'm trying to with my sister to make sure that we at least look at it and see like
Hmm.
what would be the efficacy of trying to, make sure we keep that house. Because it really is a thing to have, a piece of property, that you can do whatever with.
Listen, it's legacy too. We tell people all the
Absolutely.
time, like, don't lose grandma's house because that a lot of our generations before us recognize the power of the ownership of property, and but also what comes with that is what you just said. Now that you recognize it, make sure that you instill that in the next generation, right?
Hmm.
So now you know to instill that early, right? So I tell, like, my mother told me to go to school, you go to college, do these things, but I don't think that she just knew that's what I should have done.
Correct.
But now what I understand is why you do these things, as opposed to not that you just got to do them. And
Yeah.
it's about the next generation behind me. Like, my nephews, I'm instilling stuff in them when they're very young. So then by the time, so it's about the next generation, um, having more, doing more, having better understanding in the previous generation.
Yeah, and that brings up to mind to me, like when we talk about our parents pushed us to go to school, like the other thing that I think is really important, from the educational world, and you guys deal in finance a lot too, is like when you start to think about college, whether you go or not, because I do believe these days, like there's a way to have a life where you don't go to college. If that's not for you,
Absolutely.
then you figure out a way, you work whatever, get your, paper together so that you can build your life. But if you do, like, make the smart decision so that you're not putting yourself in that debt hole that a lot of us did, just
It's
because
about
again our parents taught us, hey, you got to go by hook or by crook.
it's about being strategic, right? And that's what I
Yeah.
said. Like, I'm not anti. I was talking to Byron, who also went to school with us, and
Hmm.
he's like, don't forget college now. And I'm like, okay, I understand why you say that, because it's sometimes it can be cost prohibitive. The economics of college have changed so much over the years. But would you want to go to a doctor that didn't go to college? There's certain professions
Correct.
there's certain professions where you want to go to school. Like, I don't care what you say. Like, you're not going to be in the
Yeah.
operating room talking about, I saw this on YouTube. Like, you're just not going to do that, right?
I don't need no
So,
YouTube lawyer. I don't
Right.
need no,
Right.
you know what I mean?
but
YouTube educated lawyer. I don't need none of that shit.
but if you're going to go, I also believe you should be strategic about going. Like, figure out ways to get certain grants, because there's a lot of grant money that goes unused. I'm a big proponent of the community colleges. Because
Hmm.
one of the things I understand is when you finish college and you just go off to a university, a lot of times you have no idea what you want to do. And you end up like me with, I switched majors, took all kinds of courses because I was trying to figure things out.
Right.
But I wasted money figuring things out when I could have
Hmm.
went half the price at community and figured things out community. And specifically in Philadelphia, I know our community college has these programs where you can they'll work with other universities in our area and have all the credits transfer, but it's at a cheaper rate. And let me tell you guys a story real quick. I took a course one year in the summertime at community just to pick up extra credits while I was in college, and it was an economics course, and the guy who taught at Penn, right? So this is a guy who teaches at Wharton, and he's just picking up extra money in the summer teaching at community.
Yep.
He comes into class and he like does his handouts in terms of the syllabus and things that he's going to go over, and he didn't even take the time to erase it. He's teaching the same thing he teaches at Wharton, and
He just gave you the same syllabus.
same syllabus. Listen, the
Exactly.
syllabus say Pen on it, like like all the handouts. I'm like, hold on. So then it clicked. It occurred to me, like, this kid's paying 5 times for the same
Listen.
So I'm gonna tell you this. I graduated from. I went to a 4-year college first, and I figured out very quickly that I wasn't built for 4-year school. I went to the Army, and when I came back, I went to community first before I went to a 4-year school and graduated. So I took the extreme long route. I went 4-year service, then I went community 4-year school.
Yeah,
And I
listen, it's the
know most
biggest
people do this.
hustle out here in particular. Like I don't know about y'all, but I always felt like CCP had a stigma attached to it. Like if you went to Central and then you was leaving
Oh,
Central to go to CCP,
absolutely, it did. Yeah.
it was like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, what are we doing?
Hmm.
Because people didn't understand the hustle. But out here in California, because you have a very strong community college system, it's nothing for these kids, to leave, especially the public schools, do a couple of years at, a community college, and then transfer into the UC system, which already by itself is a bargain because the state has put money into it. Like that's That's what they do. So it's very much us. Like the transfer rates from, like, say, a Santa Monica college to UCLA or even USC, very, very high. And like you say, you just now saved yourself a whole bunch of money because you've gotten a lot of credits, out of the way. I'm a big proponent too now, speaking of that, is like you start to get some of those college credits in high school, so,
Yeah.
one
That's
of
what
the
my
things,
son is doing now. My
yeah,
son is actually doing that now.
my son, his ninth grade summer, he gonna be taking a community college course in something, to start to get those credits. Because again, he plays sports. If he stays on a sports track, like, to be able to go into college, go to a 4 year or whatever, and have some college credits already, you just changed what the financial stake looks like
And
for
that's
you.
about being strategic with education, right? So it's about
Yeah,
being like taking a step back. How if you do want to do this, because you might not want to do this, but if you do,
Correct.
let's figure out how to be strategic with doing that. But I always found that story interesting because like I couldn't believe it. I'm like, I'm paying like quarter the price for what they pay, and he didn't even take the time to even like take it off the syllabus or the handouts, and I'm like, then it made me wonder like how many other teachers doing it, because for them it's a hustle. I can go pick up a check, teach the
Absolutely.
same course, and I'm using the same materials at all these different schools, and I'm gonna teach the same information, but the information doesn't change, right? So, man, we can go on for days about this, but John, listen,
Absolutely.
so that's the future of what you want to do, which is community building. And you listen, anything that we can do to help you with our platform that we have in our community, we want to share all of your information. And things fall apart. You gave us an amazing book. So this has been an amazing episode. Before we get out of here, though, Corey, you got any questions you want to ask John?
yeah. So when you were building this, and you said, look, I don't need. Uh, we need something that tracks right alongside the public education system. Um, how did you go about actually building the program? Like, so what were the steps? Like, give me, don't give me like your business plan, but
Right.
what steps did you take
And
to actually
let me
building it?
add something to that too, because there's one thing I didn't add. Did you have any resistance? Like, people would say, "Well, why are you African based?" Or was there any sort of resistance as you went through this process of building?
Nah, so that goes right into Corey's question. So, it's one of those things. You look at your family. My oldest son is 13. So, it was really like, how can I make sure he has the education and the grounding that I want him to have, particularly given that, half of him is Nigerian. Like my wife is a proud Nigerian, like I said, my mother-in-law's here. He can't escape that. So how do I make sure that he has a better understanding of that than I did? Like, I was to the point, this is what I tell people all the time. I was to the point, not that I didn't know that Black British people existed, but when I first met my wife in college and she hit me with that British accent that she had at the time, it was just like mind blowing. Because I was like, wait, there's Black British people? Like, it was exotic to me. And again, it's not like in theory I didn't know it exists, but it was like, wait. So
Oh,
I want him to have a much more, global mindset than I did at that time. Cause that was college. So yeah. So the first step was I got a bunch of parents. We have a village out here of folks that, if we're friends with, and you get married, like, you start hanging with families because the kids get along. So I just started going to, people in our village, like, would you help me with this? Um, and I started, to have kind of eventually what became my board. And I did a presentation to them saying, like, this is what I want to do. This is why. So everything that I told y'all, put it in a PowerPoint, presented to them. Would y'all help me with this? So out of that came my board. So it's like 7 people all together, and mostly like, basically our family friends. So husband and wives that have kids around the same age, down to help. Probably the same way y'all do for y'all class. And so then it was like, okay, they were down. Now we got a board. We do the paperwork to have a nonprofit. All of that goes in. And then we just, I would just hit them with what my ideas were. This is what I want the day to look like for the camp. As parents who have kids at the same age, how would that resonate with you? How does that land with you? You have any ideas? And it was just an exchange in that way. And then, they would leave it to me to, as the educator, to kind of form it and go find the people, right? So, okay, you want to do tennis? Go find a Black tennis pro. You want to do capoeira? Go find somebody who's going to come and teach you capoeira. What are the materials you're going to use for class? So that was all left on me. But that was it. And then we go through, and we figure out, after the institute, how we're going to raise money for the next year. So in the last couple of years, we've kind of settled on doing, something in the fall, and then we usually do a comedy fundraiser in the spring because I love comedy shows, and that's just how we keep the cycle moving. But again, now that we kind of hit the 5-year mark, and it's like, okay, we have something we're building, like you say, a following, like you guys have built. It's like, how do we start to make it even more, right? So how do you bring in, uh, you know, workbooks and materials, and make that a thing that you published, and now you got that arm, and how do you, start to build a plan for how you would eventually have a building, because we rent space now, and that's a big cost, so how do you start to move so that money can go to actually saving and buying a building that's your own, as opposed to giving money to someone else, but I've been very thankful that even when we usually rented from people who are Black, so that money has stayed in our community.
Yeah. So I think there's a lesson in that too, right? Because a lot of times when you try to help a community, you think of everybody. I got to get everybody on board. And what you just talked about is you got your people, like a small group, and you have a proof of concept and let it grow from there, right? So we see people all the time, like, I'm going to start an independent school, all right? And no shots at the brother, but like the brother Umar, who wanted to have a whole campus and raise millions of dollars, like,
Right.
to start, as opposed to your approach. I'm going to take family, friends, and everything around me and then build it out there. And now you have a proof of concept. You have students that have come through your platform, and you have results. Because like I said, I was impressed by looking at some of your student testimonials. It's just amazing to see. So I think that anybody out there watching this or listening that wants to do anything, you don't need everybody to buy it. You start small and you build out, right? So I think that's is a real gem in there, what you just said.
Yeah, no, that's important, and it's funny you bring up Dr. Umar. I was thinking about him last night, because I figured we would talk about like where I was going. And it's like, I think it's a noble quest that the brother is on, and he takes a lot of flack, um, for some of the opinions he presents. But at the end of the day, what he's trying to do is noble. He's trying to
Yeah.
educate our kids in a way that, again, he sees a gap that I see. We're trying to educate the kids in a way that's not happening in public or private schools, for that matter. And there's value in that. Um, and yeah, I just take a slightly different approach because I don't have kind of the national platform
Mm-hmm.
that he has to be going around and speaking and getting speakers fees and all that. We just start small and make a
But
program.
I think it's something to be said about the way you approach it too. And like I said, no shot to him, because I wish him success, and because I think that he sees something there. But the way you went about it, and like, you look at any sort of movement that were built, it wasn't built overnight. I don't care what it is. And it takes a small group of people in the room and let it mushroom out from there.
And I was
You know what
going
I
to
mean?
say,
So
because Corey asked this part too, was there resistance? No, because again, it was folks that, already knew, and had formed relationships with, and we had that same value system. So I think that's important as well, because again, when you really start to talk about building an institution, yeah, you're going to need people to not necessarily be yes people, but you do want people to believe in what um, the ultimate goal is, and believe that you're doing it for a greater good, right? So I'm sure y'all seen it, the documentary that's on Netflix now, about who shot Malcolm X.
absolutely.
And so the gym, and I get these pieces of affirmation wherever I go now. And so the gym of affirmation for me there was, and I didn't notice before, was just how big of a footprint the Nation of Islam had, in Chicago around that time. Like all the stores, they had the schools, they had the mosques, all, the whole economy that was running, and say what you want about, Elijah Muhammad's family and what they felt about it, but they built it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
all through our history, we've been able to do this at different times. Garvey had a, mission, and, you talk about, Black Wall Street, and even into the 60s, people were able to build things that were sustainable in specific communities, for the greater good of those people.
It's amazing, right? Because I like to harp on that. We've done this before. When
Yeah.
you Even when you hear the story of Black Wall Street, right? They always talk about how it ended, the bombing. But what's never told in that story is they rebuilt it. They rebuilt it. What happened was integration, and then the psychology behind the white man's ice is colder. That's kind of what really, you know, destroyed it. But they rebuilt it after it was after, you know, the tragedy that happened there.
I think the civil rights movement was actually more destructive to not
that to me that's a nuanced conversation because it depends.
Yeah,
it has so many layers. Absolutely.
Because of integration, not because of the actual work that was put in and the things that were accomplished, but because of the results of the integration.
But the question, Cordo, to me is it really integration or is it the psychology behind, like, you know, some of the
stuff? No, it's not integration. It's assimilation because we don't have any power. So it's not actually integration.
Exactly.
So it's assimilation.
Exactly.
So we've been assimilated into the system, integrated.
Yeah, and we didn't keep for ourselves, right? So that's, to me, is the biggest thing. Like, again, as an educator, I look through that lens all the time. So, you know, I had the chance. We did a civil rights trip with our school last year, which was amazing. We went to these different places. So for the first time, I went to South Carolina State, you know, where a massacre was, you know, in the gym that time. And what people don't know about South Carolina State, it was like one of the biggest teacher colleges, you know, for black teachers in the country. But then, you know, it kind of goes away with, you know, like you say, assimilation, integration, because all those teachers lose those jobs, you know, at the moment, you know, around the moment of Brown versus Board. Like, so it's like you say, it's layered in that, you know, we wanted better schooling, but we gave up the power of that institution of owning that training. And I think the pendulum needs to swing back a little back in that direction.
Yeah,
because
that's why
that I think that those people didn't do anything. I just think that it was detriment. What was gained and what was lost, I think we lost.
That's a matter of perspective as well. Like I said, I don't think you're wrong, but I think it's a nuanced conversation just because it's so much that was gained, but a lot was lost in terms of the ideas and what have you. But to me, it's not. Lost. But to me, it's more about psychology, right? So, like, whether we want to admit it or not, like, our people overall are still suffering from, you know, things that have happened to us hundreds of years ago. Get into what John said about, like, not even like understanding that, you know, there's black British people, black people a lot of times, like, because they're stuck in their space, don't understand that we are all over the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of where the boat stopped. Like, the boat stopped everywhere.
Correct.
It's just a matter of where the boat stopped, though. But we're all over the place. And if we're able to ever, like, you know, start to build together, this whole idea to me of a minority is a joke because we're not a minority. Like, our people are all over the world. It's just that whether we see each other as our people is
correct.
You know, so that's why I said it's a kind of a nuanced conversation. But you know, but getting back to the back on track, what I was saying about this overall conversation and why it's important for us to put you on our platform and talk about what you're building is because, again, it's not about just this is wrong and that is wrong. It's okay. Let me get with these people that have the same thought process as me, and let's just build our own thing. Start to build our own thing. Start to practice ownership, group economics, and things like that. And, you know, things will take care of themselves as opposed to just sitting around complaining about what you don't have. Go build it. And I think that's important.
Yeah, you went and got it. You just like, look, I see it. I see a gap. I'm filling that gap. Like,
and now that you've actually done that, right? You talked about getting the confidence to do that. Now you probably feel like you can just go create all kinds of stuff, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, you know, you just know that, like, I can continue to acquire skill sets, you know, because I know that there's other people doing it, right? So again, I told you math wasn't somewhere I was adventurous, but I will definitely give you your props while I'm on this platform with you to know that you guys are really digging deep into educating people about finances, you know, does another thing for my confidence, because I know, like, okay, as I start to go into this world where I'm going to be dealing with property, or I'm going to have to be dealing with investments to make sure that, you know, the funding that we get is working, I know that there's a resource for me. I could easily touch base with y'all, you know, brothers I went to school with, brothers I trust, to know, you know, you got the goodness of heart that you would give me unfiltered good information about how to make this happen. So that's a big thing, because, you know, it's very easy to try and go out and think like, you know, you go to somebody else just because they got a certain name and a certain, you know, co-signed by people that you're around. But it's different when you know somebody.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's totally different.
And it's about, like, building with like-minded people that have the same vision. So again, it's not about attracting everybody. It's about attracting the right people. right?
Absolutely.
Because one of the things, getting to your conversation, Corey, about the civil rights movement, people had this belief that everybody was on the front lines and everybody was marching. When you start to study and read,
No,
even a lot of our people were like, look,
they vilified a lot of them people as they was doing the work.
yeah. It's always amazing to me, right? Specifically, I remember like reading Muhammad Ali's biography when I got older, right? Because in my lifetime, he's always been considered a hero. But when you read the accounts and news reports of like how he was talked about, not by everyone, by our people specifically, it's like, whoa, like this is not what I've been brought up to see. They didn't. I didn't see this, right? He's always been a hero in my people's eyes, but no. Same thing with Dr. King. You start to everybody wasn't on his side. Let's put it that way. But when you get the right people and you start to build a movement, it's about that proof of concept, and then you'll get the people to come with you, and that's when you make change. So what you're doing right now is you're going to make change through those conversations you have with those number of parents and things like that. That's where it starts, and you'll see a balloon from out there. Man,
Absolutely, because then they do the talking for you, right? Like
exactly.
I'm, you know, I like conversations like this where you talking and that's really easy. But when you got to go out there and be the pitch man, that becomes a little bit more difficult. And as confident as I am in my understanding of what I want to do, like to sell yourself, to feel like the greasy salesperson isn't always the best thing for me. So I love that like you said on my website, folks are willing to put testimonies up and just share, because now nothing does more for a parent looking to educate their kid than the word of another parent. So, to have that, as the calling card versus me trying to sell you every time is that's big. That's huge,
Yeah. Man, this has been an amazing conversation, man. Like I said, we can go over days and days, but man, this is an amazing
Absolutely.
conversation. We definitely go have you back on in the future as things get back to normal and things change.
Absolutely.
As you grow,
Absolutely.
because we love what you're doing, and we need people to like do create the same thing all over the place. We should have a roots of knowledge in
Absolutely.
Texas. We
Hey,
should have a
listen,
roots of knowledge in Philly. We have roots of knowledge in Florida. Like,
hey,
you
listen.
know,
We down for linking with anybody that's doing the work that you're doing. We're down for linking with anything you want. You just make a phone call or a text message or a mess, anything.
Absolutely. Because my next trip home, I definitely got to get a book. I'm overdue to get
we got
y'all
you.
literature.
You can go on Amazon, right?
Yeah,
No,
we
but I want
got
my
you.
joint signed though, because that's
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
got you. Don't worry
yeah,
about it. Listen,
yeah.
say less.
That's the mark.
Say less. We got you. But listen though, we're going to share your links, your Instagram links, the links to your website, and all that to make sure people check out what you got going on. Let us know when you have any sort of funding, anything like that you have. I know you're a nonprofit, so keep us aware of things you got going on in that space. And much continued success, man. We definitely want to stay in touch, and there's much continued success with everything you got going on.
Have your wife come on with you the next time and talk about what she got going on.
Oh yeah, we got to bring her
Absolutely.
on too and talk
Yeah.
about
No,
all the
we'll
different
do it.
shows
We'll
she
do
got.
it. We'll do a team thing for sure.
Yeah,
She's in that
yeah. Cause
space now. She's trying to figure out what's going to happen. All the Hollywood production is kind of stopped right now. So,
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
that's a big stressor for her right now. But yes, absolutely. Because, like y'all said, we very much try to move
She has
as a
another show
team.
after All American too, right? Like, what is she, isn't All American wasn't the most recent show? Didn't she have something else that she?
That's the one she's on now. And so what happens with her is that she'll be on one show and then she's, often also developing another. So there's,
Oh,
always a
okay,
pilot in
okay,
the work. So she
got
had a
you.
pilot that she's literally working on right now to take out to streaming because ABC bought it and then they decided they didn't want to do it. So yeah,
Okay,
there's always multiple projects going on with her. I think she would enjoy being in this space to talk about, why she
absolutely.
does what she does, because for her, she tells people all the time, her All American is a love letter to Black men. She's raising two Black boys. So, that's very much the lens that it comes from. So yeah,
Absolutely.
that'll
So
be a good
send
conversation.
her our regards, man. Because like my wife and I love her shows, so send her our regards. But yeah, man, we'll have you on in the future, man. Have her on in the future, man. But again, much continued success. Cora, any last words, man? Because I don't want to. We'll be on here
No,
talking all
no,
day,
these
so
are
we
the
gotta.
actual last words. For all our supporters, we love y'all. For everybody who listens to our podcast, who looks at our YouTube, who does anything that supports us, who's come through our classes, who do anything, we love y'all. Come on back through. We got it for you. All you gotta do is come get it.
Absolutely. If there's anybody you want us to highlight or talk to, make sure you send us that information as well so we can reach out to them. But John, much continued success, man. And as we always say to our audience, it's not about how much money you make, it's about how much you keep. Game elevates, and we'll see you on the next episode. Peace.